The next section we're going to look at is cultural influences. These are really interesting because if you think about it, I mean, if there's always going to be this desire to categorize and place things into groups, and we want to be able to have a logical conversation about culture. So we need to have language, we need to have measurements and ways of looking at them. I think that's just a natural part of the social science field, is this idea of being able to categorize. And I remember years ago in the 90s when I was studying this, I took a class in intercultural communication, and Edward T. Hall was a really important guy in this field. And some of the ideas, from him are still really valid. So I think he might be somebody interesting to look at if this is sort of an interesting field for you. But let's take a look at some of these ideas or cultural influences, and they're more like categorizations or ways to look at or measure culture, a way for us to have language about them. So that might be the way that you might want to look at this. So these are the elements we're going to look at. There's going to be individual versus collectivism, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, context, emotional displays, masculinity and femininity, and time. All right, so let's start off with this idea of individualistic to collectivistic. When the overview and the overarching idea in this one kind of comes down to this idea of what is the best good? Is the best good to take care of oneself and one's family, or is it the best good to take care of the culture and the group and the family overall? So we look at this idea of independence and personal achievement being more along the lines of an individualistic culture. You're praised for individual personal achievement. And if this sounds familiar to you in the United States culture, this would be where we fall. Definitely fall in this particular category. Collectivistic cultures have more of a group identity. They have interpersonal harmony, well-being of the group, and groups they're going to look at this idea of cooperation rather than individual achievement for the highest good. So a lot of our Asian cultures end up kind of falling along in this category. I think what ends up being interesting here as we go through each one of these things, think about what happens when these two cultures come into contact with each other. What happens when an individualistic culture comes into contact with a collectivistic culture? If you haven't studied it, if you don't know the belief system that's hanging out behind it, you're going to be confused by the other person's response. I mean, this idea, if you come from a collectivistic culture and you're interacting with someone from an individualistic culture, you're thinking, what's wrong with you? Why are you so focused on yourself and taking care of your own needs versus taking care of the needs of the larger group? So this is going to be super confusing for someone in that situation. So that would be an element to think about. Also, if you're coming into contact with a collectivistic culture, there might be this thought that you can just take advantage of someone else because they're not focusing on themselves. We're going to lose some of the elements, and certainly it's going to be hard. I think it would be harder to trust someone from an individualistic culture because they're not playing by the rules. They're not taking care of the group as a whole. So definitely this idea of group identity and really looking at interpersonal harmony, and rather than being rewarded for taking care of the self and the self, being awesome, taking care of the group and taking care of the family is going to be awesome. Uncertainty avoidance, and this really relates to how comfortable are you with unpredictability, this idea of the unknown future. So if you're high on uncertainty avoidance, then you're going to try to control. and you're going to have rigid rules and conventions and control beliefs and behaviors, and you don't like innovation and you don't like creativity. You really want to have structure and organization and probably work for a company for a long period of time. You don't really want to have changed belief systems or changed, your job change. And when I can say, back when I was a kid, you would stay with a company for your whole life, and you would retire there, and you would get retirement from them. And that was the way they did things. I mean, they didn't have really retirement funds. The company would pretty much well, maybe you did, but the company would kind of take care of you, and there would be, I know my father retired from a company, and it had insurance that he had after that came with his retirement package. So there were things that where a person would stay with that over a longer period of time. Now, if you have low uncertainty avoidance, then your emphasis is more on letting the future happen without trying to control it. And then you're a lot more comfortable with diversity, with different belief systems. You might feel a bit more comfortable challenging authority. And the United States and Canada are kind of in the middle of these. So it's a good idea to think of this as a continuum. When we look at it, it's not like they're either this or they're this. A lot of times you're going to be on a continuum on any of these criteria that we're looking at right now. So there's high uncertainty avoidance, there's low uncertainty avoidance, and there's in between. And in this case, the United States is running in between. There are other countries that are a little bit more uncertainty avoidant, might be Jamaica, Denmark, Sweden, Ireland. They're a little less comfortable with that idea. Okay, so power distance. This is another interesting one and very culturally oriented when you look at it. I think definitely the comfort level someone might have in these areas is going to be different. So high power distance cultures, people of different social, professional statuses have different levels of power and privilege treatment and have extreme respect for those in high positions. So if you're in a high power distance, there's going to be a lot more comfortableness with there being a big disparity between those that have and those that have not. And the way that you're treated as being a have-not is going to be different. So I think of the different categories, and I think it's shifting now, and I think it is. I remember hearing about the Brahmas and the different categories and the untouchables. I think it's Indian culture, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I apologize if I'm giving wrong information, but I'm pretty sure that's the right one. And there is the way what you're born into is who you are through your life. I understand that's changing now. I understand that people from the different groups can have different roles, and that's starting to shift. But certainly there's more comfortableness if someone is born into a role. I think about cultures with kings and queens. The idea of a king or a queen and somebody having kind of control over the rest of the country, and them being a have and everybody else being at their whim and that being a have-not. So that's definitely a difference between those two. Low power distance is where high power positions minimize the difference between themselves and lower status positions. So they're going to interact with people in more informal ways and treat them more as equals. So, and a person with less power may even choose to engage in conflict with someone from a higher power. So there's that element. The interesting thing that the textbook mentions that I think is another element, we talked about culture being a bigger element. We also have age and mental and physical ability and gender, all these elements also being culture. And the Mexican culture, the textbook talks about this idea of respect. And there's a disparity between those who are younger and their elders. So this idea of extreme respect, I've heard that a lot from my Hispanic students, is this idea of, no, my parents are the decision makers. You don't question your parents. This is what they say, this is what goes. And the idea of arguing with that is oftentimes not even an option in the mind. So there's a definite disparity between the parents and children as far as power distance, at least in that particular culture. So context. So context relates to high context and low context cultures. And this has to do with the way that you communicate. So one of the things I think that is a major element, and Edward T. Hall is one of the ones that is kind of known for this particular distinction. And he talks about one of the reasons why there is a disparity is because, at least initially, Japan and China were closed off cultures. They weren't interacting as much with the outside world, probably back in the early 20th century. So they really weren't getting the influence of outside cultures the way that some of the other cultures were. And so then, as high context cultures, they are taught the same, they're trained the same, they learn about the same ideas in school, and they might share the same religion. All these elements are going to be the same between them. So they can make assumptions. They have a tendency to be a little less maybe direct in their communication, because there is indirect or hinting or suggesting that goes on, because they have a shared knowledge and shared background. When you look at places like United States, which are melting pots, definitely a low context culture, and we can't make the assumption that there is shared beliefs, because we have so many different people from so many different cultures here that there isn't a way for us to say, yes, we all share the same idea. So the communication is a little bit more informative. It's more direct. It does happen to be, oftentimes there's a correlation between low context and individualistic cultures. But there really is also this idea that you might want to persuade others to listen to your ideas and try to accept those ideas. So we go from context into emotional displays. An emotional display is rules about how you're supposed to act, how you should express emotions or should not express emotions if that's the situation. So in some cultures, you don't have emotions. They aren't expressed at all. Or you're very careful about managing your emotions. So, so when a culture shows the same beliefs, the same expectations, and showing grief is an interesting one because of how people are supposed to respond. The religion and belief systems around grief and somebody passing is different across different cultures. So that is an interesting one. I know that my mom passed away recently, and I think just in general, you're supposed to hold it together for their ceremony, and I was a mess. So, whatever the rules were, I was paying no attention to them. I was just crying all over the place. I was greeting people and bawling, and, yeah, I don't think I was playing by the rules at all. And it really, maybe for me, it was just, I'm just going to express whatever I feel, whatever the beliefs are about how it's supposed to be done. I blew it out the window, and I just felt what I felt. And the rules are gonna be different based on what culture you grow up in. Okay, masculinity and femininity are more along the lines of kind of belief systems. If you were to imagine the most masculine stereotype that you can think of, oftentimes it shows up here, like material wealth, this idea of competition and authoritarian and in control and master of the universe. Yeah, that might be more of a masculine idea. It happens, the book talks about this is happening a lot around Japan and Hungary, Venezuela. We have machismo that kind of happens, in some of the Hispanic countries. United States is considered to be moderate, and Canada. Oh, actually, United States is considered to be masculine, and Canada is considered to be moderately masculine. We have that belief, and I think that the idea of individualism and collectivism also could apply here, where an individualistic culture might have a tendency to be more masculine, and collectivistic culture might be considered more feminine. So I think those kind of go together. But we're looking at where people lie on the continuum again, and there might be more deviation here on this element, different from the collectivistic versus individualistic ideas. Feminism, a feminine culture, compassion, cooperation, caring for the weak. This one is interesting. Norway, Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark. So more socialistic medicine, socialistic belief systems, this idea that you should take care of everybody and everybody should be looked after, ends up being a little bit more on the feminine side of the spectrum. Now this one's interesting, and I'm going to ask my friend, in case she listens to this, to please forgive me. I'm not going to mention any names so I can tell my story. But we look at monochronic and polychronic, and I can tell you also, for me, who I am with time sometimes can vary based on if it's my off time or not my off time. So if it's my off time, I'm a little bit more flexible, but overall, I'm monochronic. I see time as something that can be wasted, something that can be lost. It's a precious resource. You'll even hear us talk about it in our culture, in American culture, where we talk about, a waste of time. And you'll hear lots of different terminology in American culture that relates to this. But the idea is, time can run out. So we're very oriented towards time. If someone says that the times you're supposed to start your shift at a certain time, you should be there ready to go, ready to rock and roll when your shift starts. So that's an expectation. And you'll hear that with many, many jobs out there. Polychronic time is more flexible. The belief that there's more harmonious interaction, it's more important to be with people and interact with people than it is to be someplace on time. And I can tell you, my friend lives in this culture, so she knows what she lives in a monochronic society. It's just that she's so this was just an example of seeing things differently. We live in kind of a little bit different. I'm very regimented. I have to be. There's places I have to be. She also has a schedule. She also has times that she has to be places, but I have like things stacked. And there was a time when we were going to go for an event, and I said, okay, so let's go to this concert. And this concert venue used to be able to go early and hang out. And so in Colorado, it's Red Rocks. So we have Red Rocks, and you used to be able to go early and you'd hang out and be like a real party environment. It's changed over time, and now you go there right before the event starts, and there isn't the same party environment where people are drunk at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because they've already drank their liquor for the day. But I'm all ready, and I said, let's meet and let's go have lunch, and we'll go to the concert. And I talked to her, and she said, well, I'm going to go up with my friend, my sister, and we're going to go up to an event in the mountains, and I'll be back, to go to the concert with you. And I'm like, okay, great. I'll be at your house. I think I said 1 o'clock or something. And I got there and she wasn't there. And I talked to her husband and he's like, well, I just know she's in the mountains. And so I don't know where she's at. I don't remember why I was having trouble. Maybe I was trying to call her on her cell phone and it wasn't there. I'm pretty sure we had cell phones then. And not sure what was going on, but we weren't able to connect with her. Anyway, 4 hours later, 4 hours later, I spent 4 hours talking to her husband. Her husband is so kind. Just listens to me being all grumpy about the whole thing. And I was upset because I sat there for 4 hours waiting for her, and then we finally made it to the concert, and we made it there on time. It really wasn't a problem. I just had expectation in my time, in my head about time, and I could be studying right now. I could be grading right now. I could be doing all these things, and I wasn't. I was hanging out with her lovely husband. And it's just a difference in time. So you run into these conflicts. If you are interacting with a culture that doesn't see time the same way that you do, you're going to run into some challenges because you're pretty sure, if you come from a monochronic time place like the United States, we're really very oriented towards time. You should be here. You should be here on time. I shouldn't have any problems. There's the expectation. We might have maybe a 5 to 10 minute window where there's a little bit of flexibility, but really not really. And you're interacting with someone from a polychronic society and they're a little bit more relaxed, and time just doesn't mean the same thing. They just are a little bit more in the flow of things. So just another issue, just another challenge where you might create issues around how people are relating to each other across cultures based on this element of time. So just to review, we did look at some different elements that relate to individualistic versus collectivism, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, context, emotional displays, and views of time. Thank you.